So we've had two things much more. The level of growth has stepped up, and the volatility of growth has gone down since the reform. Yeah. But in the 80s, we did have significant growth, and perhaps we could go through some of the reforms. You had started with the tax one, but maybe I can kindle your memory to also speak about what I would call not liberalization, but relaxation of existing rules. For instance, on the OGL list for exports and imports, for reduction in canalized imports and so on. So I wonder if you wanted to speak a little bit about that, which resulted in the 88, 89 growth rates being 10 and 11%. And then we'll come to the negative effects after that. But if we could go through some of the positive steps taken in the 80s, such as these.
I think the point you made about volatility, by the way, is very true. And there are two factors there. One is that agriculture was a large part of GDP in the earlier days. Second is that there was much more volatility in agriculture. So that translated into more volatility in the GDP. Over time, the relative role of agriculture has shrunk, but the volatility in agriculture has also shrunk. So the transmission of volatility by agriculture to the GDP has gone down quite a bit. The higher growth rate is really the result of the fact that the underlying growth rate has improved. And I think that's a pretty fair description. Now, on the changes made, a large number of changes were made in the areas of industrial licensing and also import control. But they were all small changes. I mean, like typically on OGL, the thinking in those days was that somebody would say that, listen, this thing isn't produced in India, so why should we have import controls on it? Let's put it into OGL. But the implication was that if somebody went and produced it in India, we'll shove it back into OGL, out of OGL. It wasn't a principled liberalization. Although, because there was a big demand for liberalization, the government always projected, and when I say the government, we also did the same thing, we projected every little change as if this was a huge liberalization. Now, when you think about it, I mean, let's look at industrial licensing. You know, Rahul Bajaj, who's a wonderful guy, had a tremendous sense of humor. I mean, he used to raise genuine laughter around the world by saying, look, I'm the only producer in India whose products have a 15-year waiting list. There are guys waiting to buy my scooter, and the government won't let me expand my production because there's a capacity license. Now, this capacity license thing was ridiculous in toto. It should have been abolished. But what do? We said, well, we should allow 5% increase every year automatically and cumulatively 25% over a 5-year period. So this is like conceding that the existing policy is not sensible, but then making marginal changes. Now, naturally, when that happens, everybody applauds the fact that you're making the change. But the real thing is that you're not learning the lessons, that the system is absurd. I mentioned somewhere in the book, I think, that one of the things we succeeded in doing during Rajiv Gandhi's time is to begin the process of changing the attitudes towards the public sector. We didn't succeed because the public sector, commitment to the public sector, both in the Congress party and actually in the Indian public, was very, very strong. But, you know, we said, look, when something is making humongous losses, it doesn't make sense to keep it alive. If somebody in the private sector can make it non-loss making, why not give it to the private sector? And Rajiv Gandhi agreed, and the cabinet also agreed, that we can discuss the possibility of privatizing Scooters India, which was the public sector loss-making unit in Kanpur or wherever, in UP. Now, you know, it's interesting, the bureaucracy which was asked to privatize it had discussions with Bajaj. Now, Bajaj, in my view, had a very sensible proposal. Said, look, I'll take over Scooters India. I'll even make sure that some of these scooters that you're so fond of get produced. But since that thing was producing well below its capacity, the extra capacity I'll use to produce Bajaj scooters. I mean, that's what people actually want. And the government ministry said, no, no, that's not, we can't give you that flexibility. You take over this company and you produce the same scooter, which actually nobody wants, and don't produce the scooter for which there's a 15-year waiting list. Now that gives you an idea that, how the change was being implemented in a very incrementalist manner. So the fact that it was there, we applauded that, and it's a good thing. But the honest truth is, we missed a huge number of opportunities. And I'm not a great believer, by the way, that we should make very rapid changes. I share the view of Deng Xiaoping that, you cross the river while feeding the stones. But I have no doubt that what we did in 15 years, we could have done in 7.